sure that recording is on. So I would like to welcome you and call to order the January 10th Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. Remind us of our guiding principles that are on the wall. Are we raising the bar? Are we honoring the past but not living in the past? Are we building connections with outside partners? And is the decision-making process positively impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion? Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We have a published agenda, and Councilmember Clausen, I think you've got a couple of amendments.
I do. Mr. Mayor, I'd request that we add a consent action item for a change in our representation to the KETA board, Kitsap Economic Development Alliance, and that Cindy has been representing us very well for quite a while, but her workload has increased, so she's going to be stepping down, and Sean has agreed to take on that role. So if we can confirm that with the action. And then secondly, I would ask to have the discussion item number 8 removed from the agenda. And the information will be provided in a different format.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion by Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Ciccardi. First, adding a consent item F, which is placing Councilmember Lucarelli with Councilmember Ciccardi as the city's representative on the KETA board, and then to remove the discussion item 8 related to lodging tax, and that will be, that information will be provided in a committee report. So, any questions? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None. The agenda has been amended. Are there any other proposed amendments or additions to this evening's agenda? Hearing none. Councilman Clausen.
Mayor, I move we approve the agenda as amended.
Seconded.
We have a motion by Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Trineri to approve the amended agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the agenda has been set tonight. We're to our first of our 2 citizen comment periods. The first period is for items on this evening's agenda. We have a couple of presentations and a few business items, so if anybody wishes to address us on anything related to the agenda, this is their opportunity, and there's a second period at the end of the meeting for anything that anyone wishes to address the council about. So seeing none, I will close the first citizen comment period. And before we get to our consent items, Tony, we have got a guest in the audience, and versus making Jeff suffer through the entire meeting, maybe. Yeah, and Noah's also online. We've got Noah online.
That is former council member Ashby that is online.
For public comment?
She is there, but she did not raise her hand. I don't know if you want to pause for a moment and see if she's...
I did fail to ask for the public to online, so we do see former council member Ashby online. If you wanted to address the council, use the raise your hand feature, and we'll bring you into the meeting to testify. I'm certain she's anxiously awaiting the housing action plan is why she's sitting online, but okay. She didn't raise her hand, so we'll close that. And then, Tony, would you like to introduce Jeff to us? Jeff,
sure, yes.
Jeff, come up to the microphone.
I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Hegland. He's our new operations manager. If you could address council and just maybe tell him a little bit about yourself.
It's nice to meet you all this evening. My name is Jeff Hegland. I started here in Port Orchard just in, November 21st was my first day, so just a little bit over a month. It's been an exciting first month here, so happy to be here. I've got a fairly long career in public works, coming up on 25 years now. I've worked for several cities around the Puget Sound area, and pretty happy to have landed here in Port Orchard now. So.
Jeff is our new operations manager out in Public Works, so I just wanted to introduce him, and so you guys, when you saw him driving around in the truck and he waves at you, that you know who he is.
Jeff, you were here during the wonderful weather we had.
Yeah, yeah.
Welcome.
That was a great, haven't had
Great
a
start, huh?
ice event like that in a few years. So.
Yeah, and he's very happy to eliminate the 5-hour commute that he had every day as well.
Yeah.
He comes from the city of Tukwila prior to this.
Aquila, Burien, and then University Place,
So,
wasn't it?
yeah, I started in University Place in, let's see, it was 97 as a seasonal, worked my way up through the chain there, and then did a little career in real estate when things were booming in 2005, then back to public works, and I've been with Renton, Federal Way, Burien, and Tukwila, and now Port Orchard.
And he lives local, so that's an added benefit
Yeah,
as well.
10 minutes from the shop, so if ever need something, call me.
Welcome.
Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jeff. All right, we have a published consent agenda. Is there a motion? Councilmember Clausen,
Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
by Councilmember Clausen to approve the amended consent agenda with a second by Councilmember Lucarelli. Any discussion of those consent items? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the consent items have been approved. We're to the first of our two presentations tonight, the first being the Housing Action Plan Existing Conditions Report. Mr. Bond, you have some consultants here. Would you like to
Yes.
introduce them?
Yeah, good evening. Tonight, we are going to be presenting the initial conditions report for the city's Housing Action Plan. As a reminder, the city received a $75,000 grant from the Department of Commerce to pay for this work earlier in 2022. And so this is the initial conditions report where they've gone through, they've met with stakeholders, they've interviewed council members, and they are here to present their findings before moving on to prepare their final plan and report. So we have Scott Bonjukian with Makers Architecture and Urban Design, as well as Andrew Oliver from Leland Consulting Group, who is the economist on the consultant team. And they're going to walk you through a presentation about our report. And then there's going to be some time for questions and answers. So if you have questions, please feel free to bring those up either during or you want them to do it at the end or the beginning.
Probably wait
in
till the
between.
end. Yeah, we'll be pretty quick on the presentation, I think.
Randy, are you bringing that presentation up? Yep. Wonderful.
All right. Thank you, Council, for having us. It's good to be back. You might recall, I believe we were here in July for the kickoff meeting. So in that time, we've been diligently working on some community engagement efforts and researching a lot of kind of basic background information on the city's housing status and situation. So tonight, we have kind of what we call a midterm report on where we're at so far in presenting our findings on the existing conditions or status of housing in the city, and an overview of what we've heard from some key stakeholders and the initial survey results so far. Oops, the mic on the slide here. So in terms of the project schedule, we're still pretty much on track. We made some internal adjustments, and we're also looking at adoption in the month of May now instead of April. We will be quickly drafting the actual draft housing action plan within the next about 6 or 7 weeks or so. So in your packet is our first deliverable, the existing conditions and housing needs analysis report. This provides a lot of background information on costs, demographics, affordability of housing, construction trends, and our observations on local regulations and policies. There's a lot to unpack in here, and we're going to highlight the most important pieces tonight, and we'll welcome any written comments or if you take some time to digest the material. And Andrew, our partner and urban development analyst, will go over a lot of that, and I'll talk about more about the code observations and some of the community engagement results so far. And just to mention some of the priorities of the project so far that have informed our research and our approach to the project. They're fairly similar to what we shared at the original kickoff meeting, but we just wanted to share kind of a reminder of our direction so far based on feedback from you and staff. Housing action plans in Washington can focus on a variety of different issues, so this is just a list of our priorities based on what we've heard and kind of refined throughout the research of the existing conditions process. So I'll just mention the top one here. Addressing limited housing diversity has really become a key goal, with Port Orchard perhaps one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing city in the state, seeing a lot of new historic levels of construction, but still not seeing as much diversity as perhaps the markets and new residents would desire in terms of housing types and different price points. So I'll turn it over to Andrew to talk more about our findings on all those aspects.
Thanks, Scott. Okay. Spears. Hello, thank you all for having us. I'm Andrew Oliver from Leland Consulting Group in Portland, a real estate economist and apparently poor purchasers of laptops. As my notes disappeared. Okay, here we are. So, as Scott said, this is some of the baseline findings that we've presented here in the existing conditions report, which you have before you, and so some highlights to think about and that are going to inform the recommendations in the plan itself. The population, as we all know, is growing much faster than the county and the state. This, of course, is partially due to annexations in the past 20 years, but also just due to high demand. And it's about 4% per year currently. And you can see here on the chart, the growth rate is in the orange line. It's dropped slightly since over the past decade or so. But we think that that's more a reflection of the fact that annexations were happening between 2000 and 2010, and rather not that the actual rate, would be probably still going up at that same kind of line if it were prorated for acreage, for example. Anyway, so I also put on here the current population estimate from Office of Financial Management this year, 16,400, up from 15,587 at the last census. And the rightmost bar shows the 2044 target population, which is 10,500 new residents by 2044. And we think that this, the recent growth rate, close to 3%. Demographically, Port Orchard is more diverse than Kitsap County as a whole. There are a particularly larger share of Hispanic residents, almost twice as much as the countywide average, and a younger population than regional and statewide averages. This has implications for various considerations around housing type, family size, potential for household formation by younger residents, and more internal population growth from that, as well as a need for a variety of different price points for housing. 69% of households are families, and 11% are one-person households of people over 65. So seniors are something that we look at in general when we're doing these kind of housing plans, because of course they have specific housing needs and income considerations. So that's not a massive number compared to some communities, but there are a notable amount of people who are older residents living alone. 40% of households are renters. Thank you, Councilmember Chang, for pointing out that we typed that up incorrectly in the report, but the figure is correct. 40% of households are renters. This is higher than many communities in Kitsap County. And that, of course, has implications for housing instability and also rising or less control over housing price. And this graphic here illustrates the relationship between household size and housing unit size. There's often a mismatch in these two things, and we see here in Port Orchard that that there's a somewhat greater share of smaller households than there are smaller housing units. Not to say, just to give a caveat, it's not intended to be prescriptive about how many people should live in a household or how many bedrooms people should have, but just to point out that when there's not a very large stock of small housing units, that can limit people's options if they either can't afford a larger housing unit or don't desire one. So that just points towards the housing diversity that Scott was talking about earlier. The median income in Port Orchard is currently $71,000. It's higher for homeowners than for renters, another aspect of disparities between homeowners and renters that I was mentioning earlier. And one thing that I thought was particularly interesting on the data here is that renter incomes in Port Orchard have really not changed a lot over the past decade, as you can see in the middle set of bars, compared to ownership households income, which is the second from the left. So the change in rate of increase of renter income to homeowner income also has implications, of course, for its relationship with the rise in housing prices, which we'll see a little bit later on. And 46% of residents in Port Orchard are earning less than 80% of the HUD median family income, which is the number that the federal government uses to determine eligibility for subsidized housing. Okay, so there is a greater housing diversity than the county here in Port Orchard, particularly in apartments. 63% are single-family detached, compared to 70% countywide. And as we all know, with the huge growth in population and construction, particularly in McCormick Woods, there's a lot of new housing. 57% of housing built since 1990, compared to 40% of housing in Kitsap County as a whole, which was built since 1990. And here's another way to look at the same data. This is housing permits that were issued over the past 20 years, and you see a huge increase in housing permits in general over the past decade, and especially multifamily permits in recent years. And more granularly, this is a breakdown of permit data. It's slightly nuanced, different permit data. This is actually permits that show when they're expected to be completed and a certificate of occupancy granted. So in the next few years, I just put coming years on the slide because the bar on the right is permits which have been issued, but the completion date is not yet certain, but it's not going to be a huge amount of time out. So you can say the next number of years, a few years, there's going to be nearly doubling the inventory of housing in the city, 5,190 new units. Although mostly they're single-family homes or larger apartment buildings, not so much middle housing in between those two housing types. And I'll hand it back over to Scott to talk about a few projects that we've looked at specifically in town.
Thanks. So I just wanted to take a quick pause here and put some pictures to the data that Andrew was going over. So although I mentioned, as Andrew mentioned, mostly the new permitted housing in the coming years is single-family detached homes or larger apartment buildings. Port Orchard is seeing a little bit of variety being produced, and so part of our work is to look at what those projects look like, kind of try to find out what some of the motivations were behind them, and see how we could try to encourage the development community to replicate some of these. So we've got two categories to quickly highlight here. The first is middle housing, which is typically defined as attached housing like duplexes and townhomes or anything kind of in the 2 to 8 unit range that's relatively modestly sized. This has been identified as a priority to analyze and understand why Port Orchard's not seeing more of it. So one example here is this quadplex or fourplex development that recently opened on Mitchell Avenue, just across from the high school entrance, built by a local builder. We wanted to highlight it because it's we like the design. It seems to comply with the new residential design standards that have been implemented in recent years. However, when we talked to the developer, he lamented the high construction costs and a handful of regulatory hurdles may have resulted in higher rents than he wanted. Although these are all 3-bedroom units, and they're renting at about $2,500 a month, which is not abnormal compared to the larger region. And the picture on the right shows a unofficial conceptual drawing from a developer out in the McCormick Village area, which is planning an entire subdivision of small and attached housing units. They're potentially going to maximize a new McCormick overlay zone that was implemented by the city that encourages attached housing. And this particular image shows new small homes with backyard detached garages with an accessory dwelling unit or above the garage. So that's a unique thing, and these would all be alley loaded. Other concepts in this subdivision show small apartment buildings and cottage housing and things like that. So if that project goes through, we think that'd be a great kind of demonstration of the viability of that kind of mix of housing in a single neighborhood, alongside a small commercial center that may be planned there as well. In the next category, I wanted to share quickly our observations on was mixed-use projects, particularly in the downtown Port Orchard area. The Bay Street Apartments there on the left, which is permitted, would be the first project of its kind in downtown, having at least 3 floors of apartments with a little bit of commercial space and a level of structured parking on the old Lighthouse restaurant site. And the Ramsey on the right, where we just have a site plan at the moment, is planning to take advantage of the multifamily tax exemption program and will provide some structured parking, a little bit of commercial space, and 2 residential buildings. So together, these and a couple of other conceptual mixed-use projects that have been floated in the last few years, we think may be signaling a shift in the local real estate market, where land values and rents are for residential units are reaching a certain point where these kind of structured parking and taller multifamily buildings are becoming more possible. And with that, you can start to achieve some of your objectives around compacts, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods that are identified as a priority in the comprehensive plan. So we're excited to see where these projects go, and our team will actually be able to keep track since Andrew and I as a consultant teams are also working on the comprehensive plan update, which is going to get going later this month. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Thanks, Scott. Same slide, 2 places. So there's a few slides now on the housing market and costs of housing in Port Orchard. This shows the multifamily vacancy rate, which has been falling over the past decade. As you can see here, it's currently around 3.5%. There's, in the report, you might also notice there's a couple of different ways to measure vacancy. The census has vacancy data, which can be have some issues due to it being self-reported, particularly, and also the census data on vacancy. Sometimes earlier in the report, there's a chart that shows vacancy overall, as in anything that's vacant. Seasonal homes are included in that, for example, and that's a much larger percentage than the vacancy rate that we think about as vacancy rate, which is things that are for rent or for sale. So I just wanted to mention that as a side note if you see different types of vacancy rates discussed in the report. But this is what we think about as vacancy rate, like how easy is it to find a place to live if you're a renter. In multifamily, it's around 3.5%, which is pretty low, lower than what we think of usually as an optimal range, which is more along the lines of 6 to 8%. And this just shows there's, of course, a high demand for housing, as we know, in Port Orchard. Corresponding with the demand and the low vacancy rate, housing costs have been rising. And this chart shows the relationship between housing costs and income. So you see that the median household income is shown in yellow, and it's fluctuated up and down over the years, but generally is rising. And the rent is, median rent is shown in the blue, and home prices are shown in green. So what's really striking is the rapid rise in both rent and home prices over the past few years. And this data goes up until 2020. But I also just put in the text bullet point there, the average home value as of 2022 reported by Zillow is $511,000, which is even higher than what we saw when this chart was made with the census data. So this shows, that rents and home values are rising faster than incomes, particularly in the past few years, and there's some work to be done. And this is another chart that's pulled from the report. It can be a little challenging to look at, but I think it's a useful way to visualize the ability for residents to purchase housing in the city. The bottom line shows the median household income, and the top line shows the median price of a home. And there's different sort of income brackets represented by the various bars. So you could see a household earning $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, $150,000, and $200,000. And the median household income around $71,000, as we saw. You can see that even a household earning considerably more than that, where I've put the caption there at $100,000, still would not be able to afford to buy a home at the median sales price in Port Orchard. So this shows that gap, and you know, it can be useful for people to think about it in terms of a hypothetical income or their own income. This is also assuming, you know, there's some assumptions built into here, a 20% down payment, current interest rates, which of course continue to change rapidly and make buying housing more difficult. So that's another way to visualize the relationship between housing costs and incomes. And finally, just to touch on housing cost burden, this is sort of a technical definition by HUD that is considered for households spending more than a third of their income on housing. They're considered cost burdened, and a household spending more than half of their income on housing is considered severely cost burdened. So that's what the definitions of those terms are, and you can see here that on the left-hand side, the different bars are income brackets. So it's another sort of technical chart, but basically the lower down you get on the left are lower income households, and you can see that they're spending more of their income on housing costs. More than half of households earning under 80% are cost burdened to some degree, and the lowest income households in the city earning less than 30% of the median income, the majority of them, 3/4 of them nearly, are spending almost half their income on housing costs. So it's a bit of a technical analysis, but the point is, you know, these are households that would really need subsidized housing. This shows a strong need for subsidized housing that could be provided for the lowest income households, but also in the middle incomes there, what we would kind of think of as maybe workforce housing is also a strong need in the community. And finally, the latest targets from Washington Department of Commerce, 5,291 new housing units will be needed in Port Orchard to accommodate the expected population growth, which we talked about earlier. And this shows a breakdown of the same income brackets and how many housing units will be needed in those various income brackets. So it's kind of even, actually, but you can see there's a larger number of units, almost 1,100, which will be needed for people earning the lowest income bracket, 0 to 30% of the AMI. Also a fair number of housing units, obviously for higher income earners, but a pretty strong mix across the board of a wide variety of housing price points which will be needed based on the expected population growth in the next 20 years. And Scott's going to mention a few things from our audit of the development code.
Thanks, Andrew. So we also took a look at the development regulations. So the city of Port Orchard obviously is not a home builder itself and cannot directly control the housing market, but it does kind of have a finger on the scales with your zoning regulations, design standards, subdivision standards, and other policy tools like that. So we took a look at that to see if there were any obvious barriers or perhaps less obvious barriers to producing the type of housing that the comprehensive plan calls for, and also to follow up on some of the feedback we got from some of our stakeholder interviews where they pointed out some issues. So the report has a pretty long section on this, and I just wanted to quickly summarize some of the key things on the presentation here. And these will drive some of the recommendations that we create in the actual housing action plan. So first, we found that the city has a pretty good foundation of supportive zoning standards to allow and encourage a variety of housing. You're just not necessarily seeing it actually happen on the ground, but some of the flexibility is there. The recent ordinance that updates the accessory dwelling unit standards passed in 2022 removes some common barriers to those, such as requiring parking spaces and owner occupancy of the property. Those are some of the most common barriers to ADU developments in the region, and seeing those removed is a step to encourage those. We note that the city does not have any minimum density standards in any zones, which means cities can, they don't have to, there's no incentive for developers to maximize the use of their land. So That still allows large lots, single-family homes that produce the most profit to still kind of be the default in a lot of cases with the current zoning setup. Residential development allowances are regulated in multiple chapters, which can create some confusion for code users, especially smaller local companies or those who are not familiar with the local code. Create some opportunity for confusion and conflict. We noted there's some complicated lot dimension standards using Port Orchard's kind of unique form-based code system that kind of sets different lot sizes depending on the type of building you have, whether you have street access or alleyway access. And it can be a little bit overwhelming perhaps to some, especially smaller builders. And particularly for middle housing, we noted that there's a minimum site size of about a ½ acre for cottage housing, and there's also a minimum site size for townhouses. Aside from the smaller minimum lot size just for individual units, these kind of apply to larger developments of multiple units, and the way they're set up kind of discourages those housing types as well. So the community engagement report, which is the part 2 of the report here tonight, is not in your packet today because the housing survey that's open to the general public is still ongoing, but we can share some quick highlights, talking, and also some summary of what we've heard from the stakeholder interviews. So we had 14 interviews with a mix of in-person and remote meetings. We talked to all of you, of course, on the council and the mayor, and some key housing producers working in Port Orchard. Our goal was to get a range of perspectives and from people working on the policy side and a range of developer sizes and capacities working on small, medium, and large housing projects. First, generally, we often ask folks why they think Port Orchard is growing so fast and what impact that may be having on the local markets and how the economy is coping with that. And the common theme to those on those answers was that the area's natural beauty and relatively low prices compared to places like Seattle and King County, where many people may be moving from, is what's creating a lot of attraction for folks to move to Port Orchard. Telecommuting seems like it's here to stay for especially folks who may have higher income jobs but want a larger space or a lower price point in a home office. And the local military presence is also was identified as being pretty stable and a reliable demand for housing. But we heard as more diverse people move to Port Orchard and they're at different stages of life, such as recently graduating college, or they're looking for a first-time homeowner, or they're an empty nester. Everyone's looking for options and sizes of housing to move into and to downsize or to upsize. And there's oftentimes a more growing need than has traditionally been available. For example, seniors who want to live independently, or they want to build a backyard cottage to allow their kids to move in, or perhaps a larger extended family wants to buy a duplex so they can live next door to each other. And townhomes are in particular have been popular for young couples who want to have home ownership but not the obligations of yard maintenance. And as noted earlier, there are some variations popping up to start to meet those demands locally. Some of the other takeaways from the interviews: middle housing could be built more easily with some code simplification, regulatory updates, and streamlining permitting. There's a strong link between housing growth and infrastructure needs. The topic of impact fees came up quite a bit. There was a frequent interest in seeing more housing focused in downtown as well, especially with the proximity to transit service being strong in downtown. An acknowledgement that capacity for homeless services, which is directly correlated with housing prices, there's acknowledgement that Port Orchard has a limited capacity to address that issue, but there's interest in more supportive housing that could help folks transition out of homelessness. Things like more shelters, single room occupancies, which are kind of like dorms or hotel rooms, and group living options. And to date, some housing survey key themes from about 98 responses. Actually, I believe we're up to about 107 tonight. About a third of survey takers who report they live or work in Port Orchard say they're cost burdened. Again, that's the stat Andrew talked about, where folks are spending at least a third of their income on housing. Renters are strongly interested in moving into single-family homes or home ownership in general, but they're a little bit discouraged by the challenges given interest rates and just the general base prices in Port Orchard. And homeowners are also interested in a greater variety of homeownership types than just a detached single-family house on its own lots. Townhouses, cottages, or even condominiums. Renters seem to be a bit more open to other zoning updates. And the most important locational feature of housing in terms of where it's located in the city or adjacent to amenities is in neighborhoods that are safe for walking and bicycling. Andrew and I got here a little bit early tonight and actually did a quick tour around town looking at some of the recent development happening, and one of our observations was there's not a whole lot of sidewalks or bike trails or things like that for folks to walk to just get exercise or walk to the grocery store or things like that. And other kind of side issues, but still related to housing, are the lack of daycare options and lack of some types of medical services. That can oftentimes be a housing issue because lack of those services is tied to the ability of those service providers and companies to hire workers that work at those wages and provide those services. And I just wanted to provide a quick plug for the housing survey. It is open until January 20th, so if anyone's watching online or sees the presentation afterwards, you can use the link here to access that. We'd like to get as much feedback as possible. I think maybe a goal of at least 150 responses would be good. And of course, we have a raffle option if anyone wants to enter and participate in the survey, or we're giving away 3 $50 gift cards to thank people for their time. And just to wrap up on the survey portion, one of the more informative questions here, it's a bit more qualitative, is asking folks to tell us their housing story, or to share about why they moved to the city, how they found housing here, how the cost of housing might be affecting their personal lives or lives with their friends and family. We'll provide a full copy of this, and it's all anonymous, and I'll encourage everyone to read them with some, because there's some very informative information in here. But just some kind of quick anonymous snippets so far is that renters mentioned the challenge, again, of being first-time home buyers and also being able to find well-paying jobs in the city and nearby. Homeowners mentioned being lucky that they bought their homes when they did, thinking they couldn't afford to buy the home they're in right now, given the way prices and interest rates have gone up. And a few people chimed in who said they're business owners and also mentioned they're having trouble and difficulty recruiting employees or retaining employees that are able to afford local housing. So with that, again, here's our remaining schedule after today, and hoping to have a city council adoption by resolution in May. With that, I think we're happy to take questions.
A lot of information there. Questions come to mind or comments? Councilmember Diener, I knew I could count on you.
Yeah, well, I think
Your wheelhouse.
a little bit maybe. In the draft that was presented tonight, there's I think there's 4 sets of observations that are provided, and you captured some of those as well. I'm hoping that the final will weight those observations and help staff prioritize which ones will give us the biggest bang for the buck. That's all that I had. Thank you for a well-done product.
Thanks.
Councilmember Cacciardi?
Yeah. Some of the slides, I think, alluded to it, and maybe others did not, but it's all timing, right, of when this engagement kind of started and when it's going to end. But we have an awful lot of units, as this calls out, kind of coming into the market here that maybe recently came in or will be coming in prior to kind of the deadline of this report. Are you able to take some of those updated figures to put it in here? Because I think, for example, multifamily, I mean, it's significant differences, so it'd be nice to be able to look at some of that current data that will inform decisions moving forward versus some of the data that maybe in here's back to 2019.
I think
Yes.
the questions are related to the pipeline.
And I know it's hard because of where you
Yeah, I mean,
start, but
we-
I would hate the study to be outdated.
No, absolutely, that's a great
The day
point.
it comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can, in some way, be, an issue always when we're looking at census data because it's always somewhat outdated. But Nick and everybody across the way there has been very helpful in getting us the latest permit data. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that and try to make sure that we have the most, up-to-date permit information, at least so we know it's in the pipeline, and keep that up to date up until, the spring. I don't know if Scott had any points on that.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the permit data is current through the end of January?
Yeah.
Or is December?
It was like
So,
January 15th. or
yeah,
something.
so the draft you have in the packet is, I'll call it pre-final, so we might be able to provide another update by the end of this month. Then the actual housing action plan itself will have the most up-to-date when that's published in the spring.
Councilmember Rosepepe?
Mayor, first of all, thank you for the report. I think it's, the draft and the information you give us is really well done, and it's very sobering. And I know, Mayor, you're with Housing Kitsap, but the big takeaway for me was we're outpricing, housing is outpricing our residents. And we've got to have a plan and take some action to bring housing affordable to our residents. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but it's sobering.
I can't speak to, I know the governor's plan, it's, that subsidy needs to come from the state or the federal level likely, and it's partners like Housing Kitsap as you're referring to. I know the governor has got a stakeholder group of 12 mayors on Friday, and because my position at AWC, I have a seat in the room, and there's 3 topics that we're going to be talking about: housing affordability, homelessness, and the impacts of police reform. So, and I know the governor, partly it's going to be the governor has got some thoughts and some legislation he's want to get passed, in particular related to, hearing him talk about the $4 billion he wants to put into, subsidized housing, and it's sorely needed, and this data demonstrates that.
Absolutely.
Councilor Chang.
Yeah, can you tell me about the target audience for the survey? Is it only city residents, or could it be people who work in the city but live outside the city?
Yes, both. We're asking folks who either live in or work in Port Orchard to respond.
Okay, and the survey has a way to differentiate their residency.
We ask people to self-report that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilor Diener.
So I don't know if it was in here, and I apologize if I missed it, but one of the wrenches in the works for us is the shipyard and their hunt for workers, and continued hunt for workers that they can't seem to find, or at least as fast as they'd like to. It'd be interesting, I think, to characterize that workforce and see what that demand calls for. Is it a greater need of SROs that we need to be focusing on, just to get people to work in our area, find housing and work?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the shipyard is something that I'd like to do a little more work on for the next phase as well, and try to understand that. I mean, there's a section on employment more generally in the report, and yes, that's something we're going to continue to look into for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what percentage are, for example, young men or single people that are coming to work, and what that calls for.
Yeah, if KEDA or another agency has a kind of a workforce profile, that might be helpful. For example, we did a similar project up in Anacortes, and they had the local development agency up there had a report on the refinery workers. That was very helpful in kind of fine-tuning what we were looking at.
Okay, yeah.
Mayor, just
Go to
a
Councilmember Clausen here next.
quick question or comment on I mean, this is great information. I very much appreciate it, and it's been very informative. Some of it confirming what I thought, and some of it is eye-opening. One in particular is the housing affordability, where you had indicated the price of housing in Port Orchard, the folks of 100,000 can't afford it. And my question is more related to, is that unique to Port Orchard, or is that in some of your other slides you compare us to the county, for example? This one in particular didn't compare us to anything, so I'd be just curious, and you don't have to answer now.
Well, I mean, certainly everywhere in the region, that we've been doing other projects, and probably you guys as well, it's not unique. I mean, it's definitely an issue, and other places it's even more extreme than we're seeing here. So it's definitely a regional issue all around the Puget Sound.
Thank you.
No, it's not the norm, but former council member Ashby has got her hand raised. Would you like to hear a question?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and bring her in, Brandy. Muted. She's unmuted. There we go.
Can you
hear us,
guys
Beth?
see me
There we
or not?
go. I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. Excuse me. I just have some questions, and John started to allude to them a little bit. When the council is going to make some decisions on the final action plan, I'm curious if we had looked at our neighbors and their plans, meaning the other perhaps Gig Harbor, Pierce County, the Key Peninsula, as well as the rest of Kitsap County and the other jurisdictions in Kitsap County. Because it's my personal belief that it's not up to Port Orchard to be the only jurisdiction accommodating the middle housing needs. I believe some of the other jurisdictions should also be willing to do that. And I would be curious if you looked at what their plans are. And when you did referring in your presentation to the county, I'm assuming when you're talking about the county, you're talking about the 4 other cities and the county, and not just the county excluding Bainbridge Island and Paulsbo and Bremerton.
Right, correct, yeah. That the county data is for all the cities and unincorporated Kitsap County.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah,
go ahead.
and to the first point, yeah, I think that's a good idea to look at the neighboring jurisdictions and see if they have housing action plans or where things can be coordinated. I think at the minimum we'll kind of summarize what's going on in the final action plan. And then more of that work will occur with the comprehensive plan, which takes a kind of a wider look at Port Orchard's share of growth within the county.
Right.
I'm confident Bainbridge Island completed theirs because they've talked about it, but I'm not certain about the other 2 cities.
I happen to know that Gig Harbor doesn't have one, but as I think.
Gig Harbor does not have
I
one?
don't think so.
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of. I looked for it at some point. But the other thing
So
is,
we'll look for those
And I
documents.
believe the county is doing housing action plan for its 24 comp plan update.
County, sounds like county's in process,
Yeah.
like we are, yeah.
and there's also the state, mandates for share of certain units at certain income levels, which is coming down from the county. And so we're tracking that as well, and that is sort of a separate but relevant issue of coordination across jurisdictions in Kitsap County, which is also taking place, sort of more to your point of sharing that a distribution of housing at various income levels.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Beck.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, perhaps KRCC is a good legislative platform to begin some broader discussion about sharing the burden.
And I can speak to that. The KRCC is currently looking at the requirement to plan for housing units at all levels of affordability. And so rather than just having to plan for a certain amount of growth in terms of population, we actually have to plan for housing units at each threshold of the median income to show that we're actually providing housing for all segments of the population, not just at the high end of the income level. And so we are working on that at KRCC, and we're having a meeting on Thursday on that very topic at the LUTAC level.
And I can assure you that is a topic of conversation, and some jurisdictions' actions don't mirror their words. I'm gonna leave it at that.
I'll just also point out that in the report, there is a somewhat confusing, hopefully not too confusing, comparison of various methods of that allocation in their current draft form. So that, if, as a point of interest, if you want to look at it, it's there near the end of the report.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Cool.
Greatly
Thank you.
appreciate you being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
Right, that's the first of our 2 presentations tonight. Our second is a presentation that was given to our management team here, before the holidays. I know it was probably in October or November, and we thought it would be relevant to bring it to the city council. So Debbie, would you mind introducing our guest here tonight, which is Beth Spalding?
It is my pleasure to do that. So this is Beth Spalding. She's your HR specialist working with me in the Human Resources Department. She's here to present on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion project. She was assigned last year. She's given this presentation to the management team and to the mayor. It's now your turn. So I know Beth will entertain questions if you have them as you go, but if you can hold them to the end, that may work better, but that is up to you. And I think we're just waiting on Brandy to get going with the slides.
colorful, but I don't know that that's what we're looking for.
All right, council members, thank you for providing me with this opportunity to share with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The presentation you're about to see is a compilation of research I've done over the past 10 months on this topic. I'm far from an expert, but I do believe these concepts are important to consider for our employees, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you to chart a path forward as to what this may look like. So in this presentation, we'll first spend some time getting oriented and laying some groundwork for who and what we're talking about when we discuss DEI. Next, we'll explore why this is something that may be beneficial for the city and how it fits in with current city culture and priorities. And finally, we'll address what implementing these ideas looks like and discuss what next steps you as city council may want to take. So there are a few things to consider before we begin. Whenever DEI is discussed, it's important to first take a moment to acknowledge that each of us are bringing our own biases into the discussion. These aspects of yourself are going to shape how you view the discussion and what you bring to the table, both positive and negative. So in my case, I'm white, which makes me less familiar with the experiences others may have around racial bias. I'm also a woman, which means I'm much more familiar with the experiences of sexism. I'm in my 30s, and I'm also in the millennial generation, so certain events and experiences have shaped how I view and interpret the world, as do my personal beliefs and my personality. I also live in a particular body that comes with some things I do well and some things I don't do well. I'm relatively able-bodied, but I have physical difficulties, some chronic. So I'm bringing all of this with me into the discussion, and it impacts how I process and interpret information and how I assess priorities. You also have these different areas that shape who you are. So as we go through the rest of this material, be aware of these aspects of yourself and how they may impact how you perceive and interpret the information presented. What's your racial background? Gender? Age? What's been your experience living in your body? How have your beliefs, personality, and experiences shaped how you see the world? And how might someone else see it differently? So with that information in mind, let's take a moment to ensure we're talking about the same thing when we talk about DEI. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Despite the common use of these terms, not everyone has a firm grasp of what they mean. So first of all, diversity is a passive word used to describe a group of people in which the individuals who make up the group have characteristics that are different from each other. Only groups can be diverse. Saying an individual is diverse would be an incorrect use of the term. For example, this picture shows a group of people who are diverse in some ways, race, gender, probably religion, but possibly not diverse in other ways, like age. Equity involves action. Equity is about changing processes, programs, laws, etc., so that the outcomes are fair for all individuals. It's important to note that equity is not the same as equality. Equality means giving everyone the same thing, whereas equity is focused on the outcomes. So for example, equality would say, let's give everyone the same thing, a bicycle. Equity would say, let's give everyone exactly what they need to accomplish getting from point A to point B. Or to use another example, let's say these kids can't see over the fence. Equality would say, let's give everyone a box. Equity would say, let's give them the boxes in the correct sizes so they can actually see over the fence. The third term in our trio is inclusion, which describes the culture and expectations that exist within a group of people. A culture of inclusions means that leadership is fostering a societal norm of welcome and belonging for each individual in the organization. The concept of inclusion goes beyond the absence of things like discrimination and harassment to the addition of feeling welcomed, valued, and comfortable while at work, just as you are. You might expect that DEI is something like a to-do list, first diversity, then equity, then inclusion, but that's actually not the case. We need to start at the end of the list with inclusion. The reason for this is that if you have a diverse population but don't have the culture and expectations to make everyone feel welcome and safe, that population is not going to stay diverse. Individuals who feel unwelcome are going to leave. You cannot have a sustainably diverse group if it's not also an inclusive group. Remember, inclusion is a descriptive word used to describe a culture, while equity is an action word. Equity can be used as a tool to support diversity and inclusion. For instance, if an employer provides a lactation room for employees, this is an act of equity that will both encourage women who are mothers to be in the workplace, which supports diversity, and makes them feel welcomed and valued, which supports inclusion. Diversity should be a natural result of efforts in inclusion and equity. Any strategy that simply pursues diversity without building on the foundation of the other two is setting itself up for failure. As stated earlier, people from marginalized communities are not going to stay at an employer where they feel unwelcome. Speaking of people from marginalized communities, let's talk about exactly which populations we're referencing when we talk about work around DEI. There tends to be a lot of focus on race, which is definitely relevant, but DEI certainly extends beyond race. DEI efforts aim to amplify historically underrepresented, marginalized, or underestimated communities of people. Or to put it another way, DEI aims to amplify the voices of minority populations or those who have less power in society. Who this is can vary based on your culture and where you live in the world. In the US, this means women, people of color, essentially anyone who'd be categorized as something other than white or Caucasian, sexual minorities such as LGBTQ+, religious minorities such as Muslim, people in low socioeconomic brackets, neurodiverse individuals, meaning people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, a stutter, and disabled individuals, whether it's a physical disability, mental disability, or genetic disorder. So as you can see, taking these different populations together is a huge group of people. So before continuing, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions about the definitions of DEI or what population it aims to elevate. Everyone following?
Tracking?
All right, so why are we talking about DEI? What exactly is the problem we're trying to address? So over the last few years, many organizations have shifted their focus to include addressing issues of racism in their organizational goals. In most cases, this is a response to the racial protests of 2020. It's become common for organizations to be in this reactive phase, often acknowledging that there is a problem in society and they want to do something about it. However, it's been less clear and harder to define exactly what the problem is, especially as it extends beyond simply issues of race. If we don't know what the problem is, you can't really know the best way to solve it. So to help us get on the right track, I'll briefly touch on what the overarching problem is and then explain how it affects workplaces and what we as a workplace can do about it. At its most basic level, and for a variety of reasons, our society was built for able-bodied, white, rich, heterosexual men. So if you happen to be someone who ticks all those boxes, societal expectations are probably working well for you. I've heard this described as playing a video game on the easiest level. One simple example of this is seatbelts, which were designed in 1962 solely to fit men. As of 2021, there is still no data as to how seatbelts work with a woman's body. This is even further complicated if you're a pregnant woman, 62% of whom do not fit current seatbelt designs. Tragically, car crashes are also the leading cause of fetal death in maternal trauma. This is one small example, seatbelts, of a way that society is constructed with a particular type of person in mind and how this places individuals who do not fit that mold at a significant, even lethal, disadvantage. Did the original seatbelt developers intentionally create a safety device that would be insufficient to protect women and children? It's much more likely that they were entrenched in a society that was designed for a particular type of person and didn't occur to them to consider how their design might impact someone different. So DEI is all about bridging this natural inclination for how we've been raised to view what the default person is to acknowledging the reality of our differences. It's not difficult to imagine how these disparities could start to creep into the work environment. For instance, let's say someone is an immigrant from Central America who doesn't speak English well, or perhaps they have sickle cell disease, or they simply don't have the generational wealth to help them purchase things like their first car or college tuition. So these people have to do something extra or work a little harder to meet societal expectations. Our hypothetical immigrant may be more intelligent and well qualified than his white counterpart for an open position, but he'd be passed over due to language barriers or implicit bias or lack of understanding of their new cultural setting. An individual with sickle cell disease may find themselves shut out of their desired profession due to the employer's inability to make accommodations for the disability. Or a young adult from a lower socioeconomic status may not do as well in college as someone coming from a wealthier background due to the necessity of spending time working to pay for their car and tuition instead of enjoying ample time for studying. So the farther an individual is from the archetype of an able-bodied, rich, white, heterosexual man, the more obstacles they have in their way throughout their life. Or to refer back to an earlier example, the more boxes they need to see over the fence. Beyond anecdotal examples, there's ample data to further illustrate how this disparity can affect the workplace. First, risk of lawsuits. In 2020, there were over 67,000 charges of workplace discrimination filed with the EEOC. Discrimination regarding race made up 32% of all claims, and sex was 31%. Reputation. There are cultural expectations around how diversity will be handled and promoted in organizations. And if your organization isn't meeting those expectations, it will hurt your reputation. Productivity and innovation. There is evidence that companies with less diversity are also less productive and less likely to develop innovative products. Employee retention and employee mental health. This is related to the experience of employees in the workplace. Is the culture of inclusion healthy enough that they're going to stick around? Is the environment causing stress that will negatively affect mental health and lead to increased health costs or costs associated with employee absences? And revenue. This is likely not as applicable to government entities, but it's worth noting that another place this impacts companies is revenue. According to a McKinsey report, companies in the bottom quartile for gender, culture, and ethnic diversity are 29% less likely to achieve above average profitability. So in other words, if you're meeting the status quo with diversity, you're also meeting the status quo with revenue. So what's the solution? Obviously, we will only focus on the workplace solution because societal solutions are far beyond the scope of this presentation. So DEI strategies offer an avenue to address the disparity between who society is built for and who is living in it by focusing on the underlying causes that perpetuate this disconnect. Specifically, organizations make a commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. People like being around people who are like them. It makes them feel safe, and it's how our society's been built. But when we design systems and programs for a specific type of person, we unintentionally make it more difficult for the huge number of talented people who don't fit into those categories to participate. This is our natural inclination, and if we want to combat this, we have to make an intentional effort that invades all areas of our organization. So unsurprisingly, the improvements with DEI strategies come in almost exactly the same areas that we observed problems. Risk of lawsuits. Cultivating a culture of inclusion naturally counters a culture of discrimination and harassment, which should lower the risk of lawsuits in these areas. There's no current data on this, but it makes logical sense. Reputation. Nowadays, and especially in recent years, DEI efforts are a baseline expectation for companies and for governments. For example, citizens may ask if a city's employees are reflective of the demographic makeup of its citizens. Answers to questions like this can impact how citizens view the city of Port Orchard. Productivity. Waterloo University in Canada found that a 1% increase in diversity led to a 0.5% increase in productivity. Innovation. A study in the UK found that businesses run by culturally diverse leadership were more likely to develop new products. And a study in Spain found that companies with more women were more likely to introduce radical new innovations into the market. I want to provide one quick aside about innovation and why diversity can increase innovation. So let's say you have a bottle of ketchup at home. Where do you keep it? Some people keep it in the fridge, others keep it in the cupboard. Now, if you're making a hamburger one day and you go to grab your ketchup and find that you've run out of ketchup, what are you going to use instead? If you keep your ketchup in the cupboard, you'll probably choose something nearby, like vinegar or oil. But if you keep it in the fridge, you might choose mustard or salad dressing. So your creativity is leading to very different dishes based on this one simple difference between two people. Accuracy. This is an interesting improvement. Scientists have found that employees working in diverse teams are 58% more likely than employees in homogeneous groups to perform tasks accurately. In this case example, the task was pricing stocks. The reason for this is that diverse teams are thought to be more likely to re-examine facts and remain objective. Employee satisfaction. Feeling welcomed and valued at work can reduce stress on your employees, improve mental health, promote employee engagement, and increase longevity at the organization. Keeping employees working, healthy, and happy also means lowered costs. And revenue. Again, this may not be as applicable to government entities, but there is a significant amount of research that shows increases in diversity align with increases in revenue. In Canada, the same Waterloo study I mentioned earlier found that a 1% increase in diversity led to a 2.4% increase in revenue. A McKinsey report found that worldwide, companies with the most ethnically and culturally diverse boards were 43% more likely to also experience higher profits. And Harvard Business Review found that diverse companies are 45% more likely to report increased market share year over year. And before we move on, do you have any questions on the topics I just covered? Okay. So how would DEI fit here at City of Port Orchard? What's the precedent for this, and how does it align with our current culture and priorities? So first, let's take a look at City of Port Orchard's current mission, vision, and values. This is a relevant excerpt from the much longer mission in Resolution 1838 from the year 1998. The City of Port Orchard will, within the general context of adopted plans, provide for the maintenance, preservation, and improvement of a wholesome city in which the citizens will enjoy living and raising families, recognizing the need for economic well-being and security. So you may say, there's nothing about DEI in here, and you would be correct. But if you imagine yourself as someone different than who you are today, perhaps another race, gender, or socioeconomic status, or perhaps someone disabled or a different age group, and read some of those phrases again. Is the City of Port Orchard a wholesome city for you? Do you feel safe and welcome to enjoy living and raising your family? Do you have access to economic well-being and security? This is what the heart of DEI is about, taking the time to make sure those systems and programs you have the privilege of imagining and fostering are taking into account people from all walks of life. This is an excerpt from Resolution number 1608 from the year 1992. Reaffirm and demonstrate a tolerance of new ideas and celebrate the City of Port Orchard's varied cultural and ethnic diversity. This excerpt is supportive of racial diversity, which demonstrates that the city has goals in this area. Remember, this is a vision for the city, so it's describing the direction the city wants to move. To my knowledge, the city does not have established values, but we do have 4 guiding principles that we read tonight, and I've taken some interpretive liberty with them. Raising the bar expresses a value of improvement. Honoring the past expresses a value of history, while not living in the past points to progress. Building connections with outside partners expresses cooperation as a value of the city. And I would argue that the decision-making process positively impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion is really expressing a value of inclusion because it's focused on bringing people to the table and into the decision-making process who have a vested interest in DE&I. Cooperation, progress, and improvement are also excellent supports of DEI efforts. The mayor has spoken out boldly to Port Orchard citizens regarding City of Port Orchard's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. His statements are the clearest commitment to DEI that I've found in city documents. His statements are specifically related to racism, which, as we previously discussed, is just one part of the population DEI aims to serve. Nevertheless, his support and commitment will be a huge foundational asset to DEI at the city. In 2020, the mayor released an extensive statement after the murder of George Floyd, expressing his solidarity with Black Americans. When it comes to ensuring Port Orchard is a safe and respectful community, we all must participate. I encourage all to speak, and I commit to listening and engaging in long overdue dialogue. A year later, the mayor released another statement affirming that racism will not be tolerated at Port Orchard. The City Council, our management team, and I all take seriously the responsibility to foster anti-racism and directly address racism and inequality in our policies and practices. Speaking of policies, you can also see some framework for DEI in our personnel policies. The equal employment opportunity, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, and especially the open communications policy are all in line with DEI goals. What about culture and social norms? This is where we want the effects of DEI to show up, and it's also much more challenging to define and explain. I'm not going to attempt to define City of Port Orchard's workplace culture because I can only give my impression of it, but I am going to help you reflect on what you've seen, heard, or experienced in the workplace culture. These are some items that experts suggest thinking through when trying to assess your workplace culture. Leadership behavior. What actions does leadership take around DEI? Do they spend time and resources on it? Communication styles. What communication styles are acceptable at City of Port Orchard? Is it acceptable for employees to be aggressive or demeaning? Is discussing issues around DEI considered normal or taboo? Internal messages. What messages are sent internally regarding issues surrounding DEI? Is there an expectation of inclusion, or is there an us versus them societal norm? Celebrations. What is celebrated and recognized? We have Employee of the Quarter, and we have anniversary certificates. Are there DEI milestones that we recognize and celebrate? And finally, what are accepted and normal behaviors in the workplace? There's probably an infinite list of social norms, but here are just a few to consider. How much emotion can employees comfortably show? What degree of politeness and listening is expected? Are people respectful of others' personal space? Do employees participate in group activities? So let's say we can start to discern the need to intentionally pursue DEI at the city and maybe have some initial thoughts about areas that could benefit from this. But where do we start, and what would a DEI strategy look like? So unfortunately, there's no step-by-step manual telling us exactly what to do, and there's no one-size-fits-all program that we can implement. But many organizations are working on this, and there are resources available to help. I've been learning and talking with some of our neighbors about what has worked for them, so what I'm going to present to you is my synthesis of what I've learned. I've separated the information into 3 separate stages of DEI efforts that build on each other. Stage 1 is outlining a plan. At this stage, we define where we are as a city, where we want to go, and determine what steps we can take to get there. You may have started to realize this, but when you ask for DEI efforts, what you're really asking for is a cultural shift in the organization. DEI is not a program, it's a strategy. It's not something that one department or group of employees is responsible for implementing. It's something that every individual at the organization is responsible for, and it should be part of every department at the city. So this stage primarily serves our current employees as we're examining the current culture of the City of Port Orchard workplace. The first step is to establish internal workplace DEI as a priority from leadership. One way this can be accomplished is through a resolution from City Council. Once leadership has established this as a priority, the next step is to conduct an internal assessment and discover our workplace's current climate in the area of DEI. A consultant could be utilized for this, or we could create our own assessment based on available resources. Whichever avenue we choose, it's vital that leadership treat it as a priority so the response rate will be high enough to make the information useful. After we have this picture of where we are, we're ready to determine where we want to be. There is a temptation to set a goal of a particular racial makeup of city employees. It's tempting because it's a number that can be easily measured and it's visible. But despite the attractiveness of this idea, this is not something that we can accurately measure, and it also does not address the underlying issues that affect this number. In all my research, I heard the same consistent drumbeat that DEI is not about checking a box. It's about shifting a perspective and shifting a mindset. With that in mind, there are still a few benchmarks that can be utilized. For example, the Gartner Inclusion Index can be used to measure how inclusive an employer is using the 7 factors of fair treatment, integrating differences, decision-making, psychological safety, trust, belonging, and diversity. Finally, after we've outlined our current situation, set goals, and decided on measurements for success, we can plan what steps are needed to move us toward accomplishing those goals. An employee committee can be one helpful resource in meeting goals, but leadership will need to be mindful in establishing the committee's responsibilities and abilities. I suggest that the scope of the committee be limited to promoting inclusion, since promoting equity is beyond their authority or ability, and none of us can directly create more diversity. What a committee could do is support inclusion by providing periodic education, events, and activities for employees in support of the goals established by leadership. There are many questions to think through in determining appropriate action steps. Who will establish the city's DEI goals? Who will be responsible for verifying progress toward its success? Will employee participation in DEI-specific events be compulsory or incentivized? In all of these decisions, we aim to ensure we're setting ourselves up for success. After we've answered these questions and charted our path forward, we move to the next stage and begin to enact these steps. So this work is not only geared toward current employees, but also benefits future employees by improving the culture of their future workplace. This is the stage when the aforementioned committee would be formed. One possible title for the committee is the Inclusion Commission, because again, the committee does not have the ability to influence equity decisions or the degree of diversity of a population. In the promotion of an inclusive workplace, periodic education is vital, through presentations, webinars, workshops, etc. The committee can research appropriate topics and offer these periodically, perhaps on a rotating basis. Topics could include concepts like microaggressions and unconscious bias. Leadership, or possibly the committee, could also be responsible for administering benchmarks to track progress toward meeting established goals. And as the mayor said in his 2020 statement, the nature of DEI is such that every single person at the organization needs to be involved. In line with that point, this next task is something that the committee cannot assist with. It would be the responsibility of each manager and director to think through how DEI can impact their own sphere of influence. For example, HR can update job descriptions by auditing each one for things like unnecessary education requirements or an ability to lift 40 pounds that really isn't vital for the position. It also means checking job descriptions for hidden gendered language to ensure applicants don't self-select out. But this HR example is just one avenue that DEI could show up. Every employee will learn how to view the activities in their department through the lens of DEI and have tools for making positive changes. How will managers and directors be held accountable for this? One suggestion I've heard is adding DEI as a metric on their annual evaluations. Perhaps an overall goal of the city is related to manager and director scores in this metric. Lastly, we have stage 3, and this is outward focused, so I've termed it neighborhood outreach. I want to mention this arena, though I'm actually not suggesting that it be implemented at City of Port Orchard at this time, purely because I believe we have plenty of work to do in stages 1 and 2 first. Nevertheless, I'll briefly touch on these topics so you have an idea of where City of Port Orchard may move in years to come after robust workplace DEI goals have been accomplished. So this aspect of DEI is outward focused, away from the workplace and into the community, so it's oriented toward benefiting the people of Port Orchard. It can also help employees buy into DEI efforts because sometimes it's easier to see why these concepts are important when you can see real differences being made in people's lives. Furthermore, because we're a municipal government, changes to policies and procedures during stage 2 have the potential to also impact the greater community. For example, we frequently talk about how City of Port Orchard is growing, but what we may not be aware of is that as it grows, it's growing in a specific demographic of white Americans. In 2019, Port Orchard was 67% white, and in 2021, it was recorded as 73% white. It is exploring what policies and practices are supporting this demographic shift, something that the city wants to evaluate. If so, alterations in this area could have an effect on City of Port Orchard citizens as a whole. During the course of my research, I have made connections with Kitsap County, KPHD, and Bremerton Housing Authority. This year, I will also be able to join a local group that meets bi-monthly to discuss DEI. Our jurisdictions are very eager to learn from one another, and these connections will be additionally valuable if we can pool resources to serve the local community. Time could also be spent identifying marginalized communities and easing their access to interacting with municipal government. For instance, perhaps an evening session to provide training on how certain government processes work, or providing applications and forms in languages other than English. There are certainly physical needs in the community, and we all know that unexpected events like tornadoes or pandemics exacerbate those needs. Perhaps the workplace could host collections, fundraisers, or gathering donations aimed specifically at benefiting marginalized communities. An annual Juneteenth event is hosted in Bremerton, and Port Orchard volunteers would be more than welcome to assist with it. Perhaps this tradition could be expanded to Port Orchard, and we could add in more events and celebrations in future years. Next slide. So the only question left is to consider whether you're ready to get started. As you can see in the staff report that accompanied this presentation, we've presented some possible next steps, including creating council resolution, directing the completion of employee assessment, or establishing leadership over DEI efforts in a committee. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I believe there's time for discussion. Debbie and I are happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Or Clausen.
First off, I want to thank you. I've had the opportunity to see many presentations on this particular subject, and without a doubt, this one is the best, so thank you. And that goes not only local, but regional, state, and national. So you did a fantastic job. And I just want to compliment you on that, and I want to compliment you on kind of setting the path forward for us. Because it certainly is something that I think we're all agree that it's an important issue that we need to get, I guess, just get going on. So I just wanted to thank you and compliment you.
Thank you.
I saw you were almost raising your hand. Did you have a comment?
I want to say it was a very impressive presentation as well, and I really enjoyed it, and it's given us a lot to think, given me a lot to think about. DEI is casually thrown about, and so it's nice to hear some, some solid ideas and approaches and a great presentation behind it.
It's the third time I've seen this presentation, and I'm impressed every time. So,
yeah,
Elizabeth is a rising star at the City of Port Orchard. She's doing an exceptional job in human resources. So, Jay, I saw you raise your hand there.
I do. Unfortunately, for most of us at the City Council, we check some of the blocks off that we have to guard against, and I'm just being blunt about it. And having lived through a lot of changes, thank you for keeping to move the ball forward, so to speak. So it was a very excellent presentation. I think John hit the nail right on the head about how good it was. I don't know where we go from here. Mayor keeps pushing it forward, and I think that's a great thing along with it. I wonder how we get more diverse in our city and how we get more diverse in our government, in our recruiting methods, which we talk about a lot with Debbie and with the mayor. Those are all things to look at. One question I do have is, and I think you touched on it a little bit, is when we're trying to be more inclusive, we still have, for lack of better words, an end point to reach in our performance of our jobs. So I think you touched a little bit about it, about saying, do you have to move 50? Is that really realistic, or are there other tools? But the realization we still have to move X or do Y is still important in getting the right people in the right jobs.
Correct.
With everything else. But again, thank you. It was excellent and very thoughtful.
I think this is a journey. And internally, we've been working on it for about 10 months. We sent Elizabeth as our representative to a countywide forum that she came back with energized and with ideas from, and Elizabeth touched on it. It starts with inclusion. And I think we talk about it from time to time here. We want to be an employer of choice, and that's an element of it. But there's much more work to be done in this realm. I think if you're receptive to it, I think it'd be very powerful for the city council to pass a resolution. And we've got some thoughts in that area. And then we've got work to do internally before we can take this externally, I think. Councilmember Shane?
I just want to echo what everyone said about it being a very nice and thought-provoking. I like that it was customized for Port Orchard. And the takeaway that I'm just thinking about, though, is that if I were to encapsulate what we need to do in a statement, I would say we need to reach the next generation, both in terms of council members and employees and just the population. And that would be, for me, the challenge, like, how do we do that? Often DEI presentations are so abstract. So I like that you gave some examples and that made it more, I guess, approachable in a sense. So
real. It was real.
Yeah, usually it's just so abstract, like you need 1% this to reflect your population. And I think we agree that that wouldn't necessarily, that's not the approach we want. But I do think, it's something that you see everywhere you want. It's like everybody wants to see more younger people.
What are you saying here, Fred?
You're an exception, of course. So thank you.
Mayor, can I make one more comment?
Certainly.
And this is, I'll direct this to my fellow council members. This is just food for thought, not toward individual members. Okay, I want to clarify that. After George Floyd, basically the riots went down and stuff, I had a conversation with somebody who I respected, not here on council, and the pushback was, and it was from a white male in late 60s, and it was, gee, how far we've come in 50 years. And my comment was, why the hell do we have to wait 50 years? And that would be my comment here today, is why do we have to wait? I know it's a process, and I know that some of the things the mayor's asking about, thoughtfulness, et cetera, but let's be on the cutting edge and not on the reactive edge. That would be my challenge to us. That's it.
And as I speak to it being a journey, Elizabeth is taking, or Beth is taking the lead on this. Her primary job, though, is to, fill all of our job openings. We have an HR department of 2. We're going to do work in this realm, and we're going to advance the ball here. But many organizations like Kitsap Public Health have a dedicated staff member, and I'm certain Kitsap County has a dedicated staff member to that. And we could move much faster, but it takes significant resources. And we're gonna do work in this realm. I think I'm going to come back to that question. I think the first step is maybe we'll bring it to a work study is creating some policy that you guys support and pass, a resolution that empowers us to do more in that realm. Councilmember Lucarelli?
I want to also stress that I feel we have already been moving in the direction. I don't think we have to start. We're already moving in the direction, and I would say communication is as important as anything. When we're talking about inclusion, I think the atmosphere here at City Hall with the communication process that exists and what the mayor has been working toward and the council is already moving in a direction of inclusion. And you just said it wasn't just race, it wasn't just this. And I think that has been very important, a change. If you just go back several years here at City Hall, the atmosphere is so different. we have some of us who've been around a little bit longer can honestly say this is not the same as even 15 years ago or whatever it was. So I don't want to have it seem like it hasn't been happening. I really think that it's already in progress, and you can't tell just from the outside of people exactly. So I'm congratulating the mayor and the department heads for the work that's already in progress. And yes, we need to continually move forward, but to say that we haven't started would be inaccurate. So thank you very much. Excellent presentation, and I just feel like we're already doing this.
That's a very fair statement. We are, but I think we can do more.
Of course.
And we were very, I mean, I'm very proud of the team that we've assembled here. We all work together very well. And but I think that the point is I think there's more to be done, and in particular, we need to be more inclusive. So, Councilmember Clausen, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I want to respond to your call to action, Mayor. And I agree, this is a journey. I agree that we've already started this journey, but I think we have an awful lot more to do. And your challenge, if you will, or call to action is a resolution. I would welcome a resolution that this body can get behind to show that we're one of a team at the city of Port Orchard and the community of Port Orchard, and we're certainly willing to do our part. So I would welcome that.
Thank you. I appreciate that support. Councilmember Diener?
I just want to say that, yeah, we have begun, but often the first step in any journey is recognizing that you got to go somewhere. And I think that's what we've done over the last few years. I think the chief deserves recognition for the work that he's done as well.
Absolutely.
Do you currently have a DEI committee amongst your staff? You don't?
No.
Because that might be an interesting place to perhaps start. I think, as we start looking at resolutions and policies, I think we should, use that word inclusion as part of that, and to get other people having the conversation of what those types of policies or resolutions should look like, and that the actions that we take are meaningful, and we're not checking boxes, and we're marginalizing the concept of DEI. And so, I think it'd be great as we move down that road is to make sure that, we're reaching out to this entire organization to get input, and as we start, looking at what those either policies or resolutions may look like.
And to that, we have had conversation, Beth and Debbie and I, and I think in this particular, many times, whether it's the safety committee or the wellness committee, I have to voluntold people to participate. This body of work, I think we need folks to self-select, and I don't want to point to the chief, but he's doing fabulous things in this realm, in his department, in our community, and there's people that are passionate about this, and we need to tap that. So it may not be every department that's represented, because I'm not going to pick on anybody and call it, fictitiously call a department out or anything, but it's we need to create this committee. I agree, but I think it needs to be a group that self-selects and that wants to engage in this body of work, and hopefully I get a whole bunch of people that want to do that. But we'll see how it plays out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know, we've already had employees volunteer to serve on this committee. The word is out, employees are excited, and so I echo those thoughts as well, that this is something we want people to be passionate about, but we already have had 2, I believe, employees.
I only knew of 1, so 2
Oh,
is great.
I believe it's 2 that
Well,
have.
you might be one of the 2.
Okay, 3.
All right, anything else for Beth? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent work. All right, we're going to get to our business items now. We only have 3. The first is always an important order of business. The first meeting of the year is to appoint a mayor pro tem for 2023. And that Mayor Pro Tem might be a little bit busier than normal in the first half of this year because of the legislative session and my commitments at AWC. So keep that in mind, because many times, I don't know how Councilmember Lucarelli we were on one meeting this past year. I think it might be a few more. Yeah, a few more. I'm not going to say a lot. I know this is one of my primary duties, but I take my commitment at the Association of Washington Cities seriously too. So with that, that was my speech, elevator speech about that. Are there any nominations? Councilmember Lucarelli?
I move to elect Mark Traneri, Councilmember Traneri, as the Mayor Pro Tem for 2023.
Second.
Second motion by Councilmember Lucarelli and a second by Councilmember
That wasn't
Rosapepe. Are you surprised in that nomination, Councilmember Traneri?
Very much so.
Well, then it worked.
Are you willing to accept that nomination?
I'll do the best I can.
All right. All right. Is there any discussion of that nomination? I hear none. All in favor of that nomination, please say aye.
Aye.
One opposed? Opposed?
Can I abstain, or can I?
You can abstain if you'd like. Any abstentions? I think that passed unanimously.
He must not know what we know.
Congratulations. All right, we're to item B, adoption of a resolution confirming mayoral appointments. This would be specifically to the Building Board of Appeals. Ms. Wallace.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I can't believe it's after 8 p.m. tonight, and this is the first item on the agenda for the council to consider. Well, technically second, but the first I'm reading to you. So, as you are aware, annually the clerk's office reviews expiring terms and or vacancies of members of various boards, committees, and commissions. And our office had missed one from last council meeting. So I present to you the mayor's appointment for the Building Boards of Appeals, who is a mechanical and plumbing professional. The mayor is recommending you to confirm the reappointment of Sean Hoynes for a 5-year term expiring December 31st, 2027. So with that, Mayor Patanzu recommends adoption of a resolution confirming his appointment to the Building Boards of Appeals as presented.
Okay, Councilmember Diener.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution confirming the mayor's appointment to the Building Board of Appeals as presented.
Seconded.
Motion by Councilmember Diener, second by Councilmember Traneri. And just for, Sean is being reappointed. He already served in this capacity. Can't remember the last time this committee has met, if ever. Mr. Bond? Has never met, so, but we need to have one just in case anyone wishes to exercise their rights in this realm. So, questions or comments about his appointment? All right, all in favor of this appointment, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the appointment has passed. We're to our last business item, which is approval of the December 13 council meeting minutes. Is there a motion to go ahead?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the minutes of December 13, 2022.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Diener, second by Councilmember Lucarelli to approve the December 13th meeting minutes. Discussion or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I believe we have one abstention from Councilmember Cacciardi. All right, we're to our, the discussion item related to lodging tax has been removed. We are to our committee reports. I don't believe any of our committees have met recently, or very few. Economic Development, I see, meets on January 23rd at 9:30 a.m. And the Utilities Committee it didn't meet this month. I see their next meeting is scheduled for February 14th. Finance has not met. It's the meeting date and time needs to be changed for what's on the agenda to January 20th at 9 a.m. And Noah has sent a meeting invite out to you, and it will be remote only on Zoom, and we'll get that meeting link published. Transportation Committee, I see meets on January 24th. Festival of Chimes and Lights, anything to report? I think you reported at the last meeting, and I see you have a meeting on the scheduled on the 30th. Land use is scheduled for January 18th. And lodging tax, you have a report, I believe.
Yeah, this afternoon we met with the city clerk and the city attorney just to start kind of laying some groundwork for, I think overall just trying to make sure that we're being the most resourceful we can through this process. I think our presentation this evening on DEI could actually be a part of some of these changes that are being made. And a number of other questions and just maybe education to the community. You know, some of the ideas of for-profit versus non-for-profit. I think there's confusion out there. And so we put together a list of probably 5 or 6 items that we need to do some additional fact-finding on to be able to bring back to begin making some discussion points with the entire council. So I think we're looking at probably April to be able to complete some of that fact-finding, come back, put this on a work study to where we can look at our application process from start to finish, some of the things that our applicants have to do on the front end and the reporting on the back end. This whole concept of perhaps allocating funds to things like the community center moving forward. There's just, I think just a number of things that need to be kind of dusted off and re-looked at. And so I think we'll be bringing back, you know, just kind of a scope of items for discussion in April that make sure that, you know, it's relevant moving forward. And we're doing what we can do to, like I said, be resourceful in this arena. Jay, did you have a comment?
No, I had a question, actually. Over the holidays, somebody approached me and said, do you know if the lodging tax is open, still open to receiving applications? And I said, I didn't think so at this time.
No, so typically that application process occurs once a year,
Right.
as you're aware of. Last year was a bit of an anomaly because of what happened with COVID, but we fully intend to just stay on that annual schedule and kind of make, if any changes need to be made, to do it, you know, kind of before late spring. And so when Brandy typically starts to roll things out in August, we'll be ready to go with that normal.
And I'll pass that back to him.
To the Sewer Advisory Committee, I don't believe it's met. You passed the budget there, your last meeting at the end of the year, and your next meeting is in March. Outside agencies, I've got a couple to, I don't know if you've caught any of the headlines about this, but Kitsap County forgave the $17 million in debt that they had guaranteed for Housing Kitsap. Remember so that debt burden has hung over Housing Kitsap for the last 15 plus years and really prevented them from performing their mission because they were paying this debt off and had to sell a number of assets off. So that's monumental, and it's going to allow Housing Kitsap to be able to actually work towards creating, not just managing, but creating subsidized housing in our communities in Kitsap County. And I think that Kitsap County needs to be recognized for that gesture that they made. As far the beginning of like we did tonight with appointing a mayor pro tem, all the boards that I sit on, voted chairs, so I am currently the chair of the Department of Emergency Management, and I'm the vice chair, and now on the executive committee at Housing Kitsap. And I've been the chair of Housing Kitsap, I think 3 times is my time as mayor. So next year I'll be the chair of Housing Kitsap, and I'm finishing up. I've got 6 more months in my role as the president of Association of Washington. So we are to the mayor's report. I got a few things here. I've confirmed the retreat date of March 10th with Sophie, and so far I've got kind of the typical, here's what we did last year in a little bit of a PowerPoint. Here's what, I know you guys just approved the budget, or refresh everybody's memory. Here's all the things we're accomplishing in the next 2 years. And then we've got the mid-year review items, and I'd look to you to prioritize those. We've been very fortunate to be able, over the last few years, to fund most, if not all, of the mid-year review items, but I don't know that with the economy softening, whether that'll be the case. So it's always important for, as we work through this budget, through the year, for you guys to give us your priorities, and then we'll look to other priorities that you may or may not have. Do you want to do that here and have it catered as we've done in the past, the lunch catered in? I don't know that Puerto Vallarta will still be open. That's where we historically have done it in there.
I like it here.
So we'll do it here, okay? And I'm open to any other ideas you guys have if you want to reach out to me offline on what else you'd like to see at the retreat. Got some good news from our city engineer in WashDOT about the Lowe's traffic signal. WashDOT agreed. So I was at a PSRC meeting, matter of fact, a while back, and just before the holidays, and Roger Millar, the Transportation Secretary, sits on the executive board with me, and he brought up, hey, you guys, if you've got relatively small requests for WashDOT, you don't need to go to the legislature, reach out to your regional team. So I took that to heart, and I had Chris reach out to the local office for WashDOT, and had him share our traffic consultant's study for the signals at Lowe's, because we have on our agenda. There's some improvements that need to happen in the cabinets, and those lights could be timed better with those improvements, and they agreed. We just got word back this week. They agree, and they're going to implement these relatively low cost solutions to time those lights. I don't have I'm still waiting, and then my question was, well, when? Couldn't happen soon enough, But so hopefully this summer or by this fall, that it isn't going to solve the problem out there. There is a ton of traffic there, but if we can time those lights better, we can probably move. We have a study that says that the traffic could move better. The legislative session kicked off this week, and we've already signed in support of two bills. One being House Bill 1026 is a bill that requires permit process to be administrative. And, our design reviewed process is fine with this bill, where we have code, and if somebody wants to deviate from the code, we have a process that they can go for to get approval for that deviation. But many cities, in particular some of the larger cities, have volunteer boards that are involved in approving designs and other things that add tremendous amount of time to these permit processes. So there's a bill that wouldn't allow that to no longer be allowed, and the building permit review needs to be an administrative process. So we've signed in support of that. And then House Bill 1080 is a bill that, for those communities that have body cameras, and we're about to, that if you're involved in litigation and those images are already a public document, it's not necessary for you to go through a redaction process if you got a public records request. So when you get into litigation, many times everybody wants those images, so I understand. So, and then, as I spoke to earlier, I'll be in Olympia Thursday and Friday this week. I'll be down for the mayor's exchange on Thursday, and then Friday for the meeting with the governor's office. And then our lobbyist, Josh Weiss, and I plan to go knock on a few doors Friday afternoon after that meeting. So had a great meeting with the Port Orchard Rotary Club. That's the morning Rotary Club here in town. And wanting to do, I talked to them about they want to do a project and somewhere in Port Orchard, and we talked to them about helping fund one of our mid-year review items. We got a grant for the Givens Park pickleball courts and the foosball court, and they were very excited about that. We need about another $150,000, and if I could get 25 or, and dream big, maybe $50,000 from them, we'd only need to raise another 100. So it's about a $300,000 project. As I'm required to do, we made some personnel policy changes. As we talked about, we're constantly reviewing job descriptions to make sure that we don't have things that aren't necessary. So recently, the permit center job description was updated to reflect current practices and updated duties. Remind you, next week, because we did those presentations here, we won't have a work study. So you can get next Tuesday night off. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. And then lastly, minutes from 50 years ago. I found that maybe the police chief and the public works director weren't getting along very well. And the police chief came to the city council and asked that the public works director change the times that they were sanding the roads during snow and ice events because the chief didn't think it was being done properly or at the right times. I'm so thankful that our police chief and our public works director don't come here and air the dirty laundry, and they talk to each other and work these things out. But back in 1973, that wasn't the case. And that was in the minutes of the city council meeting. And the public works engineer at the time, we didn't, stated that the sanding operation is from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. And he was very firm about that in those minutes. So that's not what the chief wanted. So it's 75 years ago. Bids were received for supplying the city with gasoline for the calendar year of 1948. So I guess we didn't have gas cards like we do today at the city. And the low bid was to Howe Oil Company for 12.5 cents a gallon is what they were providing gasoline to the city for. And 100 years ago, the city purchased some of its first water meters from Pittsburgh Meter Company at a cost of $11.83 for 200 meters. Today, 1 meter costs about $150. So that concludes my mayor's report. Let's see here. Directors or department heads. Tony, do you have anything you want to say about the police chief?
Nothing but nice words for him. Other than that, I didn't have nothing to report. Thank you.
Debbie?
I have nothing tonight, thank you.
Bond?
Yeah, I have 2 announcements. The first of them is a reminder that we are advertising a special council meeting for the ribbon cutting at the Haven Apartments on January 23rd. That's a week from Monday at 11 a.m. We have been told there will be some catering available, so you can grab lunch if you want to come by at 11 o'clock and see the new sewer lift station, tour the apartments, and look at the amenities in terms of what is getting built in Port Orchard.
So Nick, should you eat your lunch before or after you look at the sewer lift station?
Well, yeah, either before or after. But,
Okay.
Not during.
Not during, okay.
My second announcement, I sent an email to all council members concerning a meeting that I had with Eric Baker at Kitsap County. They are currently soliciting applications for urban growth area expansion, and there are 4 applications that affect Port Orchard's urban growth area. In talking to Eric, it sounds like if we were to expand in these areas, there has to likely be a commensurate contraction somewhere else. There's 3 areas, but 4 amendments. 2 of them are both just south of Albertsons in the Ruby Creek neighborhood, the Yamamoto property, and a property across the street on Sydney that would like to come in. There's another property that is just north of McCormick Village that is adjacent to the city. It's also adjacent to Bremerton. And then there is another area on Phillips Road just south of our current urban growth area boundary. And so eventually we're going to be asked to write a letter of support on those, or a letter commenting on those applications, whether we support them or oppose them, or it's more of a mixed bag. I do intend to take this to the Land Use Committee for further discussion, but if any of you have any specific comments that you'd like to convey to me, please let me know. My assumption is that as long as we don't see a contraction of our urban growth area again, you are probably comfortable looking at these things, and if it makes more sense to bring a new area in and take an area that's less valuable out, you're probably okay with that, but if that's not the case, please speak up. And that's all.
Ms. Archer.
Thank you. Nothing to report this evening. Thank you so much.
Before the chief goes, I just want to share the data that he gave me earlier related to the conversation I hope to be having with the governor about the police impacts of police reform. And in the past 4 years, we've had 2 pursuits in our city. And in 2019, we had 2 people elude our police department. In 2020, we had 4. Then the legislation changed, and then we had 10. And last year we had 33. In 2021, when these reforms went into place, we saw an 11% increase to property crime. And last year we saw a 17% increase to property crime. So I think those are very powerful numbers that I intend to share. So thank you, Chief, for that data.
Sure, and actually just a quick correction. So that the increase to crime was overall type A crimes, but I can certainly get you the other data if you need it. I do have a few things. So as some of you may have seen, our newest officer graduated from the academy, and today was day 7, and I had to continuously remind him, like, keep that same smile on your face that you have today after 23 years. Today's my 23rd anniversary, so I still have a smile on my face. Our body camera program is fully rolled out. All officers are wearing them. I just chose not to wear one to council because it's already being taped. The next step in that is our interview room, and that will be, we're hoping mid-March. A lot of that is supply chain issues, so we'll get a date, and then they'll say, man, it'll be another month, that'll be another month, but that's coming. We do have a lateral officer. We're very hopeful that she will be here about mid-March. She's got some stuff going on, but a great hire out of Kentucky. We have a new hire in background, and then January and February, we are looking at doing some additional oral boards to start bringing those numbers back up.
Wallace.
Yes, so the clerk's office is working towards rotating our annual records, paper records and electronic records. And then already this year, we have a department that is working to meet the state's guidelines on electronic records. So through the Laserfish program, there's more to come on that for a presentation to the council here in the next couple months. I'm excited to share that with you guys. And then lastly, just a reminder, Janine sent out an email for the AWC City Action Days, February 15th and 16th. If you guys want to go, let us know and we'll get you registered.
Yeah. Happy to have you along. I'm going to be down there, and we'll at least go visit our delegation and talk to them about our legislative agenda. So anybody who wishes to participate, it's a great event, and it culminates with us going to visit and knock on some doors. So love to have your company. And Noah was with us earlier. If he's still there, do you have a report for?
Yep.
There you go.
I'm still here, Mayor. I have nothing to share this evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for participating, even though you were online. All right. With that, citizen comments. We're to our second citizen comment period. We've got one member of the public. All right. Happy to see you here. And anybody online wishing to address the council, please raise your hand, and the clerk will bring you into the meeting. Nobody on public. So that would bring us, we don't have an executive session. And is there anything for the good of the order?
I can't resist.
Please don't.
So several months ago, we voted to replace the funds to replace the sign where the ferries come in. And I actually had 2 people say, thank you for replacing the old wooden sign with the new one. They looked at it, thought it was great, and that it showed a good, that we were trying to put our best foot forward. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you for Public Works for getting that done.
Tony was intimately involved in that design. It came out fabulously. We've got some more work to do. I think we need some bushes maybe on the backside to screen the backside of it a little bit, and then we're gonna frame the base of it in some timbers or something to hide those footings. It got designed to WashDOT standards for the side of the highway, and because that's what engineers do. And, it'll be, it'll withstand the next hurricane. And so we need to just dress it up a little bit more this spring. It doesn't do any good to try to plant anything right now but thank you. Yeah, we're very pleased with the way that project came out.
Just wanted to add that I've gotten compliments on that too, and then an observation that the totem pole could use some TLC as well, which will be a tricky endeavor, I suspect.
Is that ours, or is it John? What do you know? John would know.
It is ours. It was given to us by the Pakaw Indian tribe, and it was actually carved by them, and it was dedicated after former council member Jerry Grosso.
Maybe we need to get that added to the mid-year review, because it's not going to be inexpensive to
A
take it.
volunteer thing as well, if we could.
That'd be great, but I think it's probably going to have to come down and dry it out and.
Get it down on the ground.
I would suggest that we reach out to the tribe to make sure that we're dealing with it properly.
Legit.
Good point.
Tony's making notes right now. He's a good man. All right, anything else for the good of the, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just want to, it's the first meeting of the new year, and I just want to give kudos to Public Works for their tremendous job during the snowstorm, ice storm, and keeping our roads clean, keeping our citizens out there being able to move around that they wanted to. So thank you very much for that.
And the flooding.
Floods.
Oh, I forgot the floods too.
And the flooding too. And I did go knock on a few doors downtown, and just to make sure people didn't have damage. And there wasn't any, other than loss of business because the street was underwater. No one really saw any damage. And that wasn't the case in other places in the county and the region. So we were lucky. Yeah. So anything else for the good of the order? All right. Our meeting is adjourned.